Hi everyone, I'm Sylvie. I'm the studio coordinator here at Halstead, and today we are going to be learning how to tube set faceted stones. And we're going to be making two projects. We're going to be making a pendant with just a really sweet little circle charm with a CZ set in it, as well as a stacking ring. So what we're going to talk about first are the materials that we're going to use from the Halstead website. So first, our ring that we're going to use is SR226, which is a 2mm wide sterling silver band. That's in a size 6 because that's what size I am, so I want to wear it, of course. We are also going to be using S5024, a 4mm tube setting, and that has the seat pre-cut into it already, so it's super easy to set the stone when we're ready to. And we are also going to be using CZ40, which is just a clear 4mm CZ. And for the necklace, what we're going to be using is S10062, and that's a 10mm round charm, and it's got a jump ring already on the top of it so that we can string it right on a chain and make it super easy for us later. We're also going to be using S5022, which is a 2mm sterling silver tube setting that also has a seat pre-cut in it, so it's super easy to set the stone when we're ready to. We're all going to be using CZ20, which is a 2mm clear CZ stone. And the last thing that we're going to be using is 2133018, which is an 18-inch 1.3mm sterling silver cable chain. And that's got a clasp on it already so that we can slip our charm right on and we're done. Make it super easy for ourselves. So those are the materials that we're going to be using today to make our pendant and our ring. And now I'm going to talk about what tools you're going to want to use. First, you're going to need a soldering setup. So that's going to be your soldering board, tweezers, cross-locking tweezers would be really helpful for today. Solder, I'm going to be using medium solder. And you need a quench bowl, a pickle pot, but we'll go into that in a little more detail when we start soldering. You're also going to want to use a set of setting punches. So that's these guys right here, and they come in all different kinds of sizes, and they match up with the size of the setting that you're using. So if you're using a 4mm setting, you're going to want to use one that's slightly larger, about 4.5mm, so that it'll fit right on top of that setting. So these are really handy when doing tube settings. If you don't have those, that's okay. You can use a setting punch like this and a chasing hammer. So those will do the same thing that one of those setting punches will do. So don't worry about that if you don't have that set of tools. All right, so we're going to use those, and then we're also going to need a variety of attachments for our flex shaft, and that is anything from silicone wheels like this black one to any of these radial discs that are really nice for texturing, and that's kind of just a personal preference of what you're going to want to use to put a finish on your pieces. So now that we've talked about what we need to make the pieces, I'm going to get my soldering station set up, and I'll meet you back here in a minute. Okay, we're back. So I've got my soldering stuff all set up. I like to solder on a honeycomb block, so that's what I'm going to be using today, but you can use your personal preference. A pair of cross-locking tweezers, a flux brush, and my flux, some medium solder. I'm using little chips since we're doing little soldering today. I've got a pair of tweezers, a solder pick, and my torch. And that's really all we're going to need today. So I'm going to start with the ring, and I have my tube setting and my ring. And the way that I'm going to set them up is I'm going to put my tube setting upside down on the solder block, and I'm going to use the cross-locking tweezers to hold the ring and set it right on top of that setting. So I know that I can clearly see whether it's in the middle or not, because we want it to be nice and even. And with the cross-locking tweezers, I know it's not going to move around when I'm ready to solder. So I'm going to get that set up. I'm going to flux each piece as well. And what that's going to do is keep our metal nice and clean during soldering so that the solder will flow very nicely when we're ready for it. All right, so now I'm just looking above just to make sure I've got an even amount of setting on both sides of that ring. And as with any solder job, the better the setup, the easier the soldering will go. So that's looking pretty good. And I also just want to check that the ring is standing upright and it's not kicked off one direction or the other. And that also looks pretty good. All right, so we've got our ring set up. Everything looks good. It's nice and straight and even. And we're going to get soldering. Right now on my torch, I've got a size 0 tip, which is kind of a nice, even, it's not too big, not too little, but this isn't really a big piece, so not going to be a problem. And like I said, I'm using medium solder, not too high of a heat, but it's going to be a nice color match. Gently heating my whole piece, and I am pick soldering, and I'm going to put a little piece of solder right where the bezel touches the ring on each side. All right, one of them flowed. I need a little bit of extra solder on the other side. And I always put out more solder than I need, so I don't have to get any more mid-solder, because that is annoying. All right. So both of those flowed, and I'm going to take my piece out and quench it. All right, and now I'm going to get my pieces for the pendant, and I'm going to get those all set up and gather them up, and we'll meet back here in a second. Okay, so I've pulled out all my pieces for the pendant, and what I need right now is just the charm and my tiny, tiny little setting. So the way that I'm going to set this up is I'm going to put the blank flat on my soldering board with the jump ring hanging off the edge. And what that's going to do is make sure that it stays nice and flat. So I'm just fluxing up my charm. I'm doing both the front and the back of that. That's going to help prevent against fire scale as well, which is when the copper in sterling silver raises to the surface. And I'm going to hold that jump ring in my cross-locking tweezers, just so that I've got a little less movement while I'm soldering. Going to flux up my setting as well. And I'm going to align that right in the center of the charm. take a look at it from above as well as from the sides. And I've got a hole in the charm, so it makes it really easy to line that setting up right with the hole. Okay, so now that that's all set up, we're ready to solder. And what I've done is I've taken a piece of solder that's already been balled up and just placed it at that intersection of the setting and the charm. So I've pre-placed my solder because when I'm going in to actually do the soldering, the less I'm in there poking around, the less likely I am to move the setting off center. So I've tried to minimize any of that by pre-placing my solder. And when I heat it up, I'm just going to be extra gentle so that when the flux starts to bubble up and that moisture starts to evaporate, it's going to keep that to a minimum by heating it on the gentler side. All right. But as I always say, always have extra solder. I've got my solder pick ready to go in my hand just in case I need to get in there and grab a little extra. So just heating that up nice and gently. And with this, I want to focus on the charm as much as I can because that setting is small, so it's going to heat up faster than the charm will. So I'm just trying to heat that. Oh, that went nice and speedy. But that was all because I was heating up the back of the charm more. So in the process of doing that, it brings the setting up to temperature and then the solder is ready to go. So I'm going to quench this, pickle both of those pieces, the ring and the pendant, and then we'll come back and talk about finishing. Okay, so I've pulled my pieces out of the pickle. They're nice and clean, and we are ready to talk about finishing. So the finish that I did on the sample piece, I kind of did a radial pattern with a diamond burr. So it's kind of coming out from the stone, but if you want to do a high polish or if you want to use one of these radial discs to add a little bit of a texture, you know, that's total personal preference. And I'm going to put a high polish on the ring. So what I'm going to do first is pretty much do all of my finishing work, and then kind of the last thing that we're going to do is set the stones, and then we'll just do a quick polish right around the setting and then we'll be done. So I'm going to start with the pendant, and I'm going to grab my diamond burr. So I just have a very skinny pointy one over here, and I'm going to use that to make that radial pattern that I was talking about. And if you're using a silicone wheel or you have any cleanup to do with solder or anything, you want to make sure to wear a mask. Really important to do that. Always have safety glasses on. I've got my glasses on, so my eyes are all protected, but always want to make sure to have safety glasses on and a mask if you're using anything silicone or any of these puffy wheels, because these little bits come off and you don't want to breathe any of that in. So I'm just going to get going. And what I've decided to do also is leave the edge high polish. So I want to make sure not to hit that while I am working on my piece. And I'm just going around in a circle out from this setting. Right, so I've done the front, and now I'm going to do the back in the same manner. The back of the piece is just as important as the front, so don't forget about it. Okay, so I've got my diamond burr texture down on my pendant, And the next thing I am going to do is put on a pink silicone wheel. And what I'm going to use that for is to high polish the edges as well as the jump ring at the top of the pendant. And high polishing the jump ring is just a nice little finishing touch to make it look extra finished and really nice. You don't want to forget those little details. So as I mentioned with silicone, I'm going to put my mask on because that stuff is really bad to breathe in. Okay, I'm just going to wipe just some of that polishing material off my piece, give it a good look. And I am going to take a burnisher just to that front edge of the rim just to really highlight it and make it pop really nicely. So that's just one of these guys. It's a steel tool used to brighten up certain parts of your pieces. So I'm just doing that right here on the front, and it's really just going to bring the high polish of that edge around to the front so you can see it a little bit better. All right, so our pendant is pretty much done. Just going to set it aside for now while I work on the ring. So like I said, I'm going to do a high polish on this guy, and there are a couple different ways that you can do that. You can use a tabletop polishing machine with a compound such as rouge to polish it up, or you can use that silicone pink wheel that we were using. You can use a felt buff with rouge for your flux shaft. They're all great options. So I'm going to do a first run through with the pink silicone wheel, and then I'm going to finish it up on the buffing machine to get a really nice extra high polish, because that's what we want. Put my mask back on. Okay, so we've got our pre-polish all done. The majority of the finishing is done. And we are going to get our stones ready for setting. So since I've got the ring already here, that's what I'm going to start with. And where I'm going to do that is I'm going to put it in a ring clamp. So I've got a nice stability when I am going to set it, and I'm going to use the flat end so I can put that bezel right up against that flat end, push it all the way in, and it's going to give me a lot of support. Okay, so I've got my ring all in my ring clamp. I've got my stone ready to go, and I'm just going to get my setting punch ready. So I know that it's a 4mm stone, so I'm going to pick something that's a little bit bigger than 4. Let's start with 4.5. And what I'm just doing is I'm putting that punch right over my bezel. 4.5, little small. So we're going to bump it up to 5. And that fits nicely over my setting. And I Like I mentioned earlier, the seats in all of these bezels are pre-cut, which is awesome because all I have to do is pop that stone in there. So I'm gonna pop it in, just take a quick look, make sure it's nice and even and straight. Okay, so I just used my fingernail just to tap down the edges to get it nice and straight in there. And what I'm going to do with this punch is I'm just going to put it over the top and rock it forwards and backwards, side to side, and then in a full circle. And that's going to lock my stone right in place. Front, back, side to side, and in a circle. And so now it's locked in there, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move my punch up to the next size just so I really have full freedom to move it around and get that really, really locked in. And I'm just doing the same motions. I'm adding a good deal of pressure to this. And you can give it a little tap, and if you hear it, that means you just need to put a little bit more work on it before you get it really locked in. And it's all done. It is that simple. I mean, come on, so easy. Okay, so now that our ring is set, we are going to move on to the pendant. So I'm going to swap my punch out for a smaller one because we have only a 2mm bezel and stone in there. So I'm going to move up to, let's try a 2.75, see if that fits our bezel. Yep, that's pretty good. And I'm going to do the same thing. Grab my stone, put it in the bezel, make sure it's all nice and straight and even. So I just tapping that down with my fingernail, just like I did the big one. It's pretty much exactly the same no matter what size you're doing. It's the same process. So I've got my punch, my stones in there, it's nice and even and straight, and I'm going to do that same rocking motion, forwards and backwards, side to side, and around in a circle. And for this guy, you can rest your piece on your bench pin for a little extra stability. Just be mindful you might need to touch up the finish on the back. A way around that is you can always add a piece of masking tape or painter's tape to the back of your piece, and it will help protect against any scratches that might come up. All right, that looks pretty good. I'm just going to tap it with my finger, see if I hear anything. Nope, and it's all nice and set. So, little final polishing and zhuzhing up of our pieces. I'm just going to take a look at it, see if my diamond burring needs any touch-ups, and if it doesn't, I need a little bit on the back. And what I'm going to do on the front too is just take this pink silicone wheel and run it right over the edge of the bezel and the top of the stone. These are fairly gentle and CZs are fairly hard stones, so I know this isn't going to make any marks on my stone, so I can go right over the top of it. But that is something that you do want to be mindful of if you're using a softer stone. Just make sure that the grit of the wheel that you're using won't mar up the stone. So I'm just going to do a couple little finishing touches and then we'll regroup and talk about it at the end. I'm just going to grab my diamond burr and I'm going to use that to touch up the back of the piece, just since we had it resting on our bench pin. All Alrighty. So that is all done. I am just going to grab my chain, slide it through, and it'll be all finished. So I am a righty, so I am going to make sure that the clasp side, the spring ring, is on the right, so I can use it with my right hand, my dominant hand. So just sliding that jump ring through the big ring on my pendant, because they're made to fit, and that is it. We are all done. And our ring was pretty much finished already. So after I did the setting, I'm just going to give it a quick zhuzh, final polish on the polishing machine, and that will be done also. So as you can see, using the pre-cut tube bezels from Halstead are really super easy to set faceted stones. And these bezels are made for calibrated stones, so those even increments of 2, 4, 5 millimeters, etc. And they're pretty easy to find, even in semi-precious gems, like if you're looking at sapphires or things like that, you can find them very easily as well. And it's just a super easy way to add a little bit of sparkle and a little bit of color to your pieces. So I can't wait to see what you guys do with this new technique. Please share it with me on social media. We're at Halstead Bead, and you can hashtag Halstead Makers to show me what you're working on. And it's so great to see what everyone does with these techniques that we do. See you next time. All right. Hey, everyone. There was a couple questions that we didn't get to in the chat, and I want to address them real quick right now. Someone was asking about larger stones, like 10 millimeter or 7 millimeter size, and it is hard to find pre-made, pre-cut bezels in that size, so you will probably have to make them yourself. And if you're cutting the seat, what happens if you don't have the right size setting burr to cut the seat? What you would want to do is use a setting burr as close to the size as you can, and you will cut around that tube, making sure to stay really level. She was asking about a 7 millimeter stone, and the largest size burr she had was a 4. I would suggest purchasing a burr that is closer. A 3 millimeter difference is pretty big for you to be widening like that. So you're going to have a lot more wiggle room, and it's going to be harder to keep that seat level. One of the other questions was about placing solder on the inside of the bezel. You can absolutely do that with these bezels. They are a little bit higher to account for the stone culet, so sometimes it's kind of hard to get that piece in there, and if you use a small amount of solder, you won't have any issues with having excess solder on the outside, but that is a little bit of personal preference, whether you prefer to put it on the inside or the outside. We have a question right now about when cutting my seat, the inside isn't smooth. Any recommendations? The first thing would be check the speed of your burrs. Certain burrs are sold as high-speed burrs, so that means that you do have to use them spinning very quickly. And you're also going to want to start spinning your burr before you begin cutting your seat, and that will help cut down on chatter. A lot of it also is just hand control and practice. So practice on some pieces that aren't super important to get it, because it is a lot of control. What are your thoughts on using solder in the tube rather than pick soldering? I have never used solder-filled tubes, so I personally can't speak to that. I do like pick soldering because it gives me a lot of control over how much solder, where I'm placing it, and all kinds of things like that. I do also want to highlight that if you are looking to experiment with tube setting, or are just getting into it, we are offering a kit of stones and CCs that's at a discount. Then if you purchased all of the items separately, it's kit 3 on our website, and it comes with 10 2mm CZs and tubes, 10 3mm CZs and tubes, 10 4mm CZs and tubes, and 5 6mm CZs and tubes. So that's a great deal for you to start playing around with some of this, and it's just clear CZs. So that's kit 3 on our website. We are pretty much out of time. If you have any other questions, feel free to put them into the lobby chat and I will answer them there. The next session is starting at right now. And it is on website search engine optimization so that you can get better traffic to your website. So that's a great one. You definitely don't want to miss it. So head over to that, and thank you so much for joining me. See you later.